Welcome everyone to today's research seminar. This seminar is actually part of two seminar series. One is the more or less semi-monthly series hosted jointly by the Michigan Program in Survey and Data Science here at the University of Michigan and the Joint Program in Survey Methodology at the University of Maryland. The other series is the Inclusive Research Matters seminar series hosted by the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Working Group on Educational Programs at the Institute for Social Research here at the University of Michigan. Today's speaker is Scott Crawford. Scott is a research consultant and founder of SoundRocket, a social science research firm located here in Ann Arbor. Scott has a master's in applied social research from the University of Michigan, which in many ways is the precursor of the current program in survey and data science. Scott has focused his career on the use of innovative technologies in social science research, including web, multimode, mobile surveys, and Internet of Things. He has assisted in the implementation of survey research projects for hundreds of researchers and research institutions. You can read more about this at the SoundRocket website, and has led innovative collaborative research projects, including the National Campus Climate Survey. Recently, Scott has overseen several higher education-based campus climate surveys of diversity, equity, and inclusion, including at the University of Michigan, where a focus of the study design has included maximizing the ability for individuals who can use screen reader technologies to participate equitably, the topic about which I believe Scott will be speaking today. And as something of an aside, let me just note that Scott and SoundRocket have been wonderful friends over the years for MPSDS. So it's a great pleasure to welcome Scott Crawford today. His talk is entitled Equity and Inclusion in Accessible Survey Design. Scott.
Thank you, Fred. It's amazing to be here and talking with you all today. I always felt like I've been part of that program as it's evolved, and it's fun to continue to collaborate. So I'm glad that I have this other opportunity to do that. So yeah, dive right in. I have about 40 slides to go through. Some will go through kind of quick, some will go through more speedy. But to start off with, just do a quick self intro. My name is Scott Crawford, and I do work at SoundRocket, where I'm the founder. I also kind of consider myself day to day as a research consultant. I am a white cisgender man, very early 50s. I'll emphasize very early 50s. Still getting used to that idea. With graying hair, full beard, and my pronouns are he and him. So to jump right into this conversation, and I do plan on having some significant time at the end for questions. But I want to first acknowledge my contributors, because this is an effort that's been going on for some time. A lot of the knowledge that I've gained here has come from additional other employees. We've presented on topics similar to this at regional conferences and APOR and a few places before, and some of the people listed on the contributors group here are people who have presented as well. But without their work, I wouldn't be here talking about this today. So first, some background, and just to frame everything a little bit. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know a lot about the law. However, there have been some good resources that I've looked at over the time. Becoming familiar with American with Disabilities Act is important, I think, to do in this context. That came around in 1990. And Section 508 was added to the Rehabilitation Act in 1973. That's what you hear about a lot in regards to technology and use of technology in accessible ways. That's also something to be familiar with. And shortly after, there was an effort put forward by the World Wide Web Consortium, or W3C, where they released the WCAG, or the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So these are three laws or guidelines that are out there and available, and there's some additional resources at the link at the bottom of this screen. that I would encourage anybody that wants to get into the background and some of the legal details and specific details. They're certainly sources that we've looked into and used over the time. So I'm just going to start off with some common issues that we've found in survey research with regards to accessibility. And most of the conversation today is going to be focused on technology. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we administered some technical solutions to solve some of the problems that we had or seen or identified before. But it'd be remiss to completely skip over that and go entirely to the technology without speaking about some of these other things. So the language that you use, whether they're translations or even just the basic readability of the language you're using is part of accessibility. You people to be able to understand what you're asking them in the survey. Literacy levels of your responders are important to consider as you're completing your survey. It's a common theme that I've seen in academic circles where we spend a lot of time talking about concepts and theoretical propositions and things that really don't make sense to the average person. And then some of that language seeps into the survey and that becomes really inaccessible. They don't necessarily understand even what we're asking. Consider how visual content is being used. So if you do have a survey where there's visual content in some form, consider how that is being used. And that starts to cross over into some of the technological issues, but it doesn't have to be. Having a survey where someone is having to look at an image and seeing the image itself is required to answer the survey or adequately is not very accessible to those who have sight or sight issues, see less than necessary for doing that. This also applies to some of the issues that I'll be bringing up in the technological side. There's slider bars. That's a concept that is very difficult to do without a visual component. Semantic differential scales, which we're going to talk about in detail. Use of images and even colors alone. There's a lot of research that shows how colors and other things in self-administered surveys like web surveys might have an impact on survey response when people actually see those colors. And so you consider what might be happening if people aren't seeing those colors as well. And then multiple modes of data collection. This is one of those that you don't want to rely upon mode choice as an easy solution to provide accessibility. I'll comment on that in a moment, but multiple modes of data collection are a good thing, but make sure that you're doing that in a way that does really have the equity and the accessibility in mind. It's not equitable to submit someone to a telephone interview with an interviewer on a sensitive topic if everybody else in the survey is taking a survey on self-administered web platform, say. So things like that need to be considered as you're going through the design. And those, and I just actually touched on this last bullet, so I'm not going to repeat myself. So why does it matter? All of you here are here probably because it matters. So that's, I'm going to be speaking to the choir a bit, but I do think it's important to put some of this in context because, survey researchers, and this is my opinion, having been in the field. My first job in survey research started in 1996 at the Survey Research Center. I came in as a research assistant, and having been in the field now since then, I've seen some things happen. Survey researchers develop these certain strategies to kind of cope with the limitations, sometimes the perceived limitations of the technology or of the design of the surveys that we do. And with interviewer administered surveys, poor interface and personal interview, telephone interview instruments are often just handled by adding interviewer instructions. And so if we can't quite get the system to work as we want to, we add these instructions in to train the interviewer how to accommodate, how to deal with that. Anybody who's been in the field probably has seen that happen. Let's train them around this problem is a common thread. It works, but it's inconsistent, relies upon the interviewer to engage and maybe it's not the right way to do it if you really wanted to be thorough. Then we see in difficult user interfaces in self-administered surveys like web surveys. Those are sometimes then handled by introducing an interviewer. So if we can't quite get the data the way that we want to in a web survey, maybe because we're going to require some visual element, then the alternate may be for us to bring an interviewer in and have a telephone call, which could work. But we're lacking this truly compliant web survey solution, and we need to provide some sort of an alternative. And rather than trying to figure out how to make their web survey compliant, we get sometimes a little lazy and just go back to the easy way that we know that it could work. So there are these tendencies that I've seen, and I'm not pointing any finger organizations. I think every place I've worked, including current organization, has done this from time to time, and it's time for us to step back and really kind of think about, is that the right way to go? So now back to the data side of this. Why does it matter? Consider just for the moment, if you are designing a nationally representative study, and in this nationally representative study, something about the way that the study is designed makes it so that people in California, Texas, and Florida, the top 3 populous states, are not able to participate at all in the study. Wouldn't be very nationally representative. You'd be rightly criticized. Well, that's about the same percentage of the population who report having some form of disability in the U.S. May not be a disability that might interfere with them participating in the study, but so let's go a little further then. Let's just think about Michigan, Ohio, and Illinois. So Midwest, let's take them out of the study, put California, Texas, and Florida back in. If we remove Michigan, Ohio, and Illinois, right there, we're at about 11%. And this is about the same population in the US as people who have difficulty concentrating, remembering, or making decisions. Now that you can start to see, well, those people are probably having a little bit of a difficulty with some surveys. If they're having a hard time concentrating, remembering things, there's a lot of recall activity, a lot of cognition required to do this. So then let's drill down one more level. And now we go back to just having Michigan and Wyoming and Vermont and the District of Columbia. Let's throw in Alaska and North Dakota as well. That's about 4.6% of the population. And that represents about the number of people who suffer from blindness or serious difficulty seeing. So here now we're getting at some of the real impact of not having a design that actually takes into consideration some of these issues. You're risking having almost 5% of the population of your study not really being represented appropriately. So if that isn't really convincing, there was a great article just recently published, and it got some press in the news. Some of you might have seen it, the recent CDC study that NORC did from the National Immunization Survey. This last October, we published adults with disabilities were less likely to report receiving at least one dose of or being unsure about where to get COVID-19 vaccine. So this is a real application of where disabilities themselves are having an impact on people's lives in ways that maybe hadn't been thought about much before. And if you're studying these topics and you're looking to try to understand them, and you have a design that also misses these people, that might be a problem. They were also more likely to report barriers to vaccination, including getting an appointment online, knowing where to get vaccinated, and going to a vaccination site, getting to the vaccination site. Just for those methodologists interested, this is the article. If you really want to dig into that, and this is the question format. So this is a simple format of a question to identify whether people have some significant disabilities that impact how they deal with their daily life. So it is really important that we find ways to make sure that these individuals are included in our studies. So the technology. I'm going to touch on technology, and there's a lot out there. There's a lot of different things that can be done. There's a lot of different technologies that can be used in engaging with people who are disabled in various forms. We're going to look at how to use technology and survey design to improve that respondent interaction increase that engagement and improve ultimately data quality. So we must consider those, who use computers in what we consider non-standard ways. They may not have a keyboard like that many of us have. They may not have a mouse like many of us have. They may work and interact with their computer via voice. There might be some other types of devices that are being used, and we'll look a little bit at those. And they do cover these assistive technologies, accessible technologies cover a large segment of software type products. There's assistive hardware, screen readers, speech control, dictation software, mouse grids, and just to kind of give everybody a little bit of a background in case you're not familiar with those. Let me pull everything up. There we go. Screen readers themselves are, or also sometimes you'll see magnifiers. Screen readers read the screen. Magnifiers will magnify an area of the screen so that it can be seen better. They're typically software tools that use a combination of things, voice, et cetera, to display what's on the computer. Here are, I would say, anybody interested in working with, improving your surveys and how they work along these lines, I'd recommend diving into one or more of these products. There are others out there. These are 4 that I'm familiar with. I've used 2 of them a few different times. JAWS is the one you always hear about. I think it seems to be the most prevalent. It is only Windows only at this point. Apple VoiceOver is the Mac operating system version of this. Chrome browser has I think it's a plugin that is will help with the same issue. And then NVDA is another tool that can be used to try out. So I recommend, at least 2 or 3 of these are free. You can get an academic or a educational license. I think students actually can get a free license to JAWS as well. Download those, try them out, and see what the experience is like, because it can be eye-opening sometimes. And great for testing. Braille displays are also in use, and certainly something to consider. They are. I was amazed at the price. I just went and looked to see what do these actually cost, and some of the high-end units can be up, $15,000 or more. But most of them do cost at least over $1,000, and so they're maybe not as common. We might not see them as prevalently. However, within a university setting, I suspect that they probably are available for those who need them. But this is a technology that usually works in combination with a screen reader. So the contents is read to the user and then uses this keyboard with an adjustable Braille display that presents the contents that's showing up on the screen. There's a speech control or dictation software as well that is another way to interface with the computer that as often comes up. Dragon is a product line. Actually, there are several different products. It's primarily Mac, although I think they do have some non-Mac solutions now. These are speech control or dictation software that helps you with content. So you can order your computer to do things like send an email, or you can even write the email by having it dictate. Both Mac and Windows also have built-in features that help with that. Mouse grids is not something you hear about as much anymore, but every once in a while, and this usually is paired with a magnification process. This is where basically the screen is broken up into a grid where you can, the input is to drill down into, say, if I want to get into the Wikipedia entry area, I would indicate 5, and then that section of the screen would blow up, and then another grid, and I can zero into exactly where I want to click or interface with in some form. So our challenge here, we had back in 2016, 2017, we had the opportunity to work with the University of Michigan to conduct its first large DEI survey. Those of you who are familiar with the university probably got an email from me, if you're that back then, but got an email from me in the past several months as well. We're doing the second data collection on that right now. But back in 2016, 2017, the study design averaged about 15 minutes. It was a web-based survey, mobile optimized. It was designed to be accessible to all as a census of all students, staff, and faculty. There had been a previous, the fall of 2016, there was a survey, a random sample survey, and then followed by the following year, it was a census. There was a random drawing for incentives, and there was a lot of messaging that was coordinated with the university to get out to let people know. And this was the effort where they really wanted to ensure that everybody had the ability, an equitable ability to participate. So we had the opportunity to conduct a diversity, equity, inclusion survey as a census. We wanted to ensure that the study be open and available to all students, faculty, and staff who wish to participate. We wanted to know that participants should be given an equal opportunity to participate confidentially. So options where they would have to interface with an interviewer wouldn't be ideal. And then we wanted to adjust the survey to adapt for screen readers and other assistive devices and really do a good job there. That's where our focus was for this effort. Ultimately, we wanted to provide an equitable experience for all participants. So with any effort like this, we have some resources and some limitations resources. One of the great resources we did have here was we had access to the IT accessibility institutional equity experts within the university who helped us focus in our efforts to improve the functionality and the layout. Two resources, one of them I already mentioned, the WCAG, but also WebAIM is a great also accessibility resource. These resources were invaluable for more on the technological side of figuring out how to adapt the web surveys that we had already been using and systems we'd already been using to be as compliant as possible. You'll hear me say things like that, as compliant as possible. This is, like a lot of things, this is an ongoing changing field that we're learning about every day. Some of it is just that we're learning about it. Some of it is that there are new technologies, new issues, new awareness of types of disabilities, et cetera, that come out, and you do have to pay attention. And what was workable 5 years ago may not be exactly workable today. So, but we implemented these technical changes across 3 different major categories, and I'm going to go into some of those specifics right now. But we did have some limitations. Time. This was university budgets are unfortunately not unlimited. I was taught in grad school at Michigan that you could always sit down and think about a survey project with this imagination of unlimited budget of what you would do if you wanted to conduct this this amazing study, standard kind of thing, and then start paring back from there, because then you have to talk about, okay, what are your actual limitations, and time is one of those. We didn't have years to prepare this. Financial, that kind of comes hand in hand with time. The current survey platform. We had been asked to use a platform that was also familiar and used at the University of Michigan as well. This is one that we had been using, that's that Illum, version 6.2 is what we're currently using. But that platform dictates a lot of what we can or cannot do. It is very good at these accessibility issues. However, there are some limitations that we had to work with, and it's not perfect. So identifying those limitations became important. We decided that our primary focus was going to be on that screen reader technology. So that's where we really felt like we can make the biggest impact. And then we had additionally a previously developed questionnaire. So this questionnaire came to us to be fielded. It was developed in part by a committee that worked on this for some time. We had some say in it, but ultimately there was a questionnaire that had we had to work with. And as we'll see, there were some limitations or some issues there. So the first decision we had to make was, okay, do we make this survey accessible to all, just from the start, where no part of the design is inaccessible, or do we have to have some sort of a branching or decision point? And that seems like it might be an obvious question, but some of the limitations that we had to deal with, we weren't quite sure. It wasn't really an obvious decision. So what would we miss if we did that? Well, there were some measures, some questions within this survey that were really important to the research team, and those measures required a visual component. And again, I'll talk more about those in a bit, but we didn't feel like removing those or removing the way that those are presented for people who can see was a good way to proceed. Ideally, we wanted to find a way to ask those questions slightly differently so that they could be accessible, but also do it in a way that can be controlled and monitored and evaluated, so that in the future, maybe we could demonstrate for the scientific community that this can be asked in a different way, so that it is more accessible for all. So ultimately, we did decide that we needed to proceed with a parallel instrument, which meant that there was going to be a branch point where, when we identified if someone needed the accessible version or not, there was too much that we would be giving up scientifically at this point to make it work. So that's the way we proceeded. What that exactly looked like was, I'll show you here. So there wasn't really, we first looked at automated ways to do this. And there are some ways you can detect whether screen readers are being used, but there are a lot of different screen readers out there, a lot of different technology, and it just wasn't consistent. We couldn't be certain about that. And we didn't necessarily, we didn't want to miss out on having some people who really felt, for whatever reason, they wanted to have the assistive capabilities to be able to do that. And so we decided that doing this automated way wasn't going to work. Instead, right at the beginning, we introduced a question. We asked the person responding, or basically we had a statement that they could then select or check the box if they decided they wanted to use assistive technology screen readers during the survey. So if they selected that, then going forward, the survey had a more fully accessible design. If they didn't select it, they would have the standard design for our web surveys. So let's look at some of those specifics of what we did. We have, this is a very typical screen layout for one of our surveys. We have a header across the top that's somewhat graphical. It gives people context to where they're at in the survey. It's not a functional header. You can't click on, say, part 2 and get to that point. It just kind of shows you where you are in the survey. There's some repeated visual components, like a logo in the upper left-hand corner, questions button on the upper right-hand corner, things that quickly a sighted individual going through this will start to just ignore. And that's intentional. That's, we put it there so they know it's there. It provides context and kind of a frame for the survey, but after that, it's only there and only really accessed if needed for some reason. Unfortunately, for a screen reader user, this requires a lot of stuff to be read out prior to getting to the actual question on every page. So you would hear an alert indicating that there's a logo, SoundRocket logo, and then title, campus climate survey, and then questions, and then part 1, part 2, part 3, prior to even getting to what the question is each time you got the page. And that would get a little old. It would not be an enjoyable experience. I know I would break off during the survey if I had to listen to that throughout for every page. So we did modifications to how we designed the survey, and we really just cleaned it up. The very top, we would get straight to the question. So the very first thing that a screen reader would do is we'd go to the question and read the question. The questions button was moved down to the bottom, kind of out of the way. There's another aspect to that I'll touch on in a moment. But this allowed for the minimal amount of content to have to be read at every page. Then we looked at the grids, and grids just in general are difficult. The accessible tables need the HTML markup to be fully marked up, where there are header cells and data cells, and everything is defined in a way that makes it really clear to the screen reader technology how it is all related. It still doesn't make it extremely easy to navigate a series of questions like this, though. It is difficult. So we decided the easier and better solution to ensure people understood what the questions were and what the response categories were for each of these. We decided that a option of breaking that grid out into individual questions was the right way to go. Now, interestingly, this is something we do anyway for mobile devices. And so if you're taking a survey on a mobile device, you would already have seen the question like this. It doesn't matter whether you're an accessible version or not. It makes it much easier to navigate on a small screen. One other thing to mention in this is that this is one of those areas where we found there was some limitation in software. While we have some ability to get in and improve the labeling of parts of the question, when we get into grids, there were some areas that the survey software just would not allow us to get to. So this was also done partially because we really couldn't make 100% compliant table grid using the product. In a situation like this, where there are text boxes, the screen reader would just simply read "other degree, please specify text box." That if there were no specific labels marked, and just the native way that this software worked, it would not put in any sort of text box description. So we had this was one of the more time-consuming parts of this work, is going into each one of these and introducing a custom label for that field, so that the respondent would understand what it was that was being entered there. The text we would put into something like this would say something like, "Please enter your other earned degree here," and that would be read aloud. I mentioned earlier, going back to this question button, there's some functionality that is very interactive and smart on the web today, where the contents of the question button are already actually in the screen. They're just not visible to the user until they click on that button, questions. If you didn't go through and set this, what you see at the bottom of the screen, the button ID set attribute, to the area expanded, and ARIA, I'm not sure actually if it's area or ARIA, but it's an acronym for Accessible Rich Internet Applications. What we're saying there is area expanded true is that tag is telling the screen reader that, hey, there's some expanded text here, read this. False would mean there's some expanded text, don't read it. So it gives some guidance to the screen reader on what is relevant to be actually presented. Here was the most difficult part of the change that we had to make. And this is because it dealt with a questionnaire design. It actually wasn't a technological issue, but we dealt with it anyway, and we did introduce some technology solutions here. But this type of question is called a semantic differential. It's fairly common in survey research. I've heard people swear by it. I think it's a great way to get data in certain times. And I also I've heard some people who really don't like the question. So that's not debating that today, but assuming that you do have a question like this, as you can see in the presentation, or if you don't have sight, as you can't see in the presentation of the words, it really does require a visual presentation. There is a horizontal display of radio buttons that are unlabeled. There's 5 of them in between 2 words. So on the top example, disrespectful is on the left, then there's 5 horizontal radio buttons, and then respectful on the right. You have to be able to really see that to understand how you're going to respond to this. The instructions itself kind of insinuates it a little bit, but it doesn't give any sort of direction as to which radio button is which. And someone getting this on a screen reader would would actually hear something like disrespectful, radio button, radio button, radio button, radio button, radio button, respectful. You know, now that you've heard that, how would you go back and decide which radio button to select? You know, that's a difficult issue. So the way we dealt with this was two things. First, we needed to update the language. We needed to change the way that the question is actually read. So this old text became a little longer, but instead of we had to find a way to step through these items. So the new text was, for the next few questions, we will ask you to think about a scale from 1 to 5. You'll be presented with a word pair where 1 represents the first word of the pair and 5 represents the second word of the pair. Thinking about the words friendly and hostile, where 1 represents friendly and 5 represents hostile, including all values in between. Which adjective best represents how you would rate your institution based on your direct experiences? That second paragraph there, the thinking about the words part, would be repeated for every word pairing that there was. Not ideal, but we felt like this was the best way to get this across in a screen reading environment. And this next screen, just how it would look different. So how did this all work? Those were the things that we did to improve upon those the areas that we found were lacking and where we needed to approach to improve upon this. We did get 364 participants who opted for the accessible version. That was a success. I mean, there's tens of thousands of participants in the study. So to put it in context, it was not a huge percentage, but it was 304 people opted for that version. They took about a little over 12.1 minutes to complete the survey versus 11.5 minutes. So they took a little bit longer, but not much longer. That was good to see. They were more likely to report some types of disabilities, including ADD, 43% versus 22%. They were more likely to indicate that they are blind or had low vision, 14% versus 2%. They're more likely to indicate they're deaf or hard of hearing, 21% versus 5%. I should just say that the sample sizes are small here. So just be very cautious about these numbers. I considered not even including them exactly. They're very small numbers. So just a caveat there. We're hoping that this second iteration will give us more data so that we can start to get a little more definitive about some of this. They were less likely to report chronic illness or mental health as a disability, though. That was an interesting difference. So there was this oddity, though, that we noticed. Only 4% of those who used the accessible version self-reported as having any form of disability. So that means that 96% of those 300 and something people didn't self-identify as having a disability, but they still chose the accessibility version. Why? They may have simply decided not to self-disclose the disability. That might be the case. They may be survey research students, staff, faculty, curious about the functionality. There are some of those at the university. It might be something else. So we really started to learn and see what we can learn about this. Substantively, on the topic of DEI, did it matter that we were more inclusive? Well, I think the data has shown us that we were. Looking at the satisfaction with overall campus DEI climate, the data showed us that there was a significant difference between people who indicated they had a disability and those who did not. And that is, if we're doing things to increase the participation of those with disabilities, we're getting more at where there might be some issues. And the data shows that there might be some issues here. So there was justification there. I think we were happy that we had gone through the efforts that we did when we looked at this data. Of those who used the accessible version of the survey, they also did report a higher level of discrimination regarding their ability and disability status. It was not a significant difference, very small sample size. It was almost significant. I'm putting that in there. 3.7% who did not use the accessible survey versus 6.3% of those who did. So that's, probably with some additional data, we might have something that's significant show up here. Looking at racial and ethnic identity, and again, these are people who use the accessible survey version. They felt that they had a higher rate. They had discrimination or felt discrimination about their racial or ethnic identity in the past 12 months. So there is something happening there too. It's not just people who are disabled. And then we saw this around country of origin. So those who used the accessible version were also reported a higher level of discrimination based upon their country of origin. And this struck us as interesting because we know that only about 15% of the students in the study were reported to have been born in the US, and that's using some institutional data. And then overall, about 70% of the population reported to be born in the United States. So maybe potentially up to 30% of the population was not born in the United States. But seeing data that suggested that 21.5% of those who used the accessible version of the survey felt discrimination about their country of origin was kind of a clue. And we thought that's interesting that high of a proportion were there. So who actually used this accessible version? Well, it turns out that just over 50% of the respondents used the accessible version reported that they were not born in the United States, compared to 26% using the standard version. And then we looked at citizenship status. 35.2% of accessible version respondents were classified as non-resident aliens, as compared to only 14.1% of the standard version. So we had a much larger percentage of people who were born outside of the US and that were not citizens participating in the accessible version. We unfortunately didn't have any data to tell us, so what does that mean? But our working theory is that we believe this is reliance on screen reading translation tools. Just like screen readers are used for helping people with low sight, you can have a screen reader do an automatic translation for you. This raises a whole lot of issues for survey methodologists, as you can imagine. Usually we're very controlling about what sort of translation is presented to respondents within a survey. We don't know if this was actually happening, but I suspect this is probably what it was, given the population that was they were seeing that they could have an accessible version. They know from their experience of using screen readers for translation that accessible versions are easier. So they selected that so they can have an easier path through the survey. How that translation may have impacted the questionnaire and the data is a whole other question that really requires some research at some point. So I'm on to the concluding thoughts. Gone through a lot of material, a lot of information, and I think these concluding thoughts are fairly simple. There's a lot out there that we can do better with. I think it's time for us in survey research to not be passive. We need to expect to learn at each step. And I'm going to tell you a little story about, we fielded this survey in 2016, 2017, and we went through a lot of efforts to ensure that it was working very well for screen reading technology. We didn't make a significant change to it in the current administration of the survey. However, it turns out that there is something else that we were not able to accommodate last time that is a bigger issue today. There is some additional labeling that we can't get access to within the survey system as it stands. That does cause some issues with making sure that there's a connection between a question and response categories on any given screen. Our survey designs were typically presented in a way where there's one question and one set of response categories per screen, with some exceptions, like where we broke the grids out. So I think we minimized some of the issues there, but this data collection. We have learned something new, and I can guarantee when we do this again, we will have addressed that. It's very possible that this next move might require that we move to a different survey system, or even develop some of our own. but we're exploring that. We're looking at ways to make sure that we get better the next time. Don't be passive about it. Expect to learn at each step, and it's if you think you've got it, it's probably better to just open your eyes and see where we maybe are going to be able to do it a little bit better next time. I think we are seeing clearly that accessible and equitable designs can reduce non-response bias and also just generally data quality. If we have people who are participating in surveys that would not have otherwise, we are improving. We're doing better. We're getting at respondents that would not have responded otherwise. Equitable and accessible design is good design for all. So the two things that really point to this is one is a lot of the things that we did for an accessible design are also things that we did for mobile design. There's a lot of crossover there. If we're designing well, it should not matter what sort of device we're on or what sort of technology you're using. There are standards out there that we can achieve, that we can strive for, and we shouldn't be too persuaded by glitzy and fancy features and capabilities that might look great, but reduce our ability to actually field the survey fully and equitably. And then lastly, the equitable and accessible design may also bring in others to the survey that you didn't think about. Now, there is a lot that needs to be learned there. We certainly understand that a good number of people use the accessible design, and we don't know why. A study is definitely warranted, one that we hope we can get an opportunity to do. But in learning about that, I suspect that we'll find that a lot of that is just simply the technology that people are using that we're maybe not used to thinking about as survey researchers, who probably primarily use keyboards and mice and interface with a monitor, who are not thinking about these other ways, the translation issue or other things. And so we may be accidentally surprised by some additional benefits of doing this. And that is all I prepared for you today. I'd be happy to move into questions at this point.
Yeah, thank you so much, Scott. It's a wonderful presentation. I think we can open the floor to either chat questions or voice questions. Chat is probably better, and I'm happy to moderate that, Scott. Read the questions to you from the chat, or you can just do it yourself, whatever you prefer.
Sure. With the way it's set up right now, I can't see chat.
Okay.
So yeah, you could.
So let me. Okay. So far, no questions. Just a thank you. Actually, while we're waiting, I have a question on one of the last results you reported. It really, I'm just asking you to speculate about this because I don't think the data really will allow you to answer this definitively. But I'm just trying to figure out where the causality might lie in some of those differences, say for reports of discrimination between those using the accessible system and the accessible design and the conventional design. Is it selection, like those who choose the accessible design are in fact experiencing more discrimination, or might it be that they're more willing to report discrimination because of the design for whatever reason? It feels, I don't know, more welcoming or something. Do you have any sense of that?
I think that, that's it's a good question. I don't know for sure. I would say, I think most likely they are people who are aware of, anybody who has to deal with accessibility issues is going to key in and identify that this is something that is being offered up at this point in time. And so if they get to that. I guess that's the point. I think maybe it's very likely that a lot of people who have needs for more accessible designs are not even engaging in the survey to begin with. But those who do and then select that, I think, are I would suspect very interested in having that opportunity to share their concerns, and so maybe are being it could be a self-selection. It could also just be that they're being a little more comfortable than sharing concerns that they wouldn't have before. I don't know. It is a good question.
Yeah, it's a real interesting phenomenon. So thank you. So there are now a few questions in the chat. I'll read them to you. From Sandy. When designing a survey, do you tend to bring in consultants who use assistive technologies, or do you tend to learn how to use those technologies yourself?
A little bit of both, actually. I'm one I really like to kind of kick the tires a little bit. I mean, I know. I mean, there are definitely some things that can be dealt with without having someone who is using the technology day in, day out. Someone who's a novice like me in using the technology, can quickly pick up on some of those big eyes. But I do think it's important to get someone that is more of an expert to engage with and run through the demo of the survey. Use it on their own to give you some feedback. I don't know. I can never imagine myself how someone with, say, sight disabilities works with a screen reader, and actually some of the day-to-day things that might come up for them in how they're interfacing with it. And so, having someone in that position, I think would be valuable. There are also things that an issue. There are issues, like there are these things that are not ideal, and then there are critical issues that are like it would stop the person from participating. So that there's also kind of help in identifying what are the ones that are really the point to put your efforts into initially. Where if you can fix A, then at least everybody will be able to participate. It might be clunky for some, but that's another area that the experts can really help out
in. Deb asked, her comment is, somewhere, Scott, you mentioned that you dealt with image questions. How did you deal with those scenarios?
Yeah, so image questions, that's, I would strongly recommend not to, to rely upon an image in a survey in any form. If you need to, and you just need to make sure that the image is very well labeled. You can add alt tag information to make sure that a thorough description is given to someone who's using a screen reader. But still, that's if it's really key to the research to present an image, that's difficult to really address appropriately. It's so dealing with an image that's just simply there to help supplement other written words is fine, just as long as it's labeled. So that's the key thing, is that you don't want to leave the person with the screen reader with no information to go on, and with just knowing that there's an image and maybe that it's labeled image 1. That's not helpful. And so having some sort of a label is good. As long as it's not really critical for the research question.
Daniel asked, do you find there are differences between discrete surveys and, quote, forms, unquote, for ongoing systems where a user may have only incidental exposure in completion? And if so, could you explain how they differ?
I don't have any experience with forms other than, in the context of a full survey. And so I think what you saw in my examples is the kind of work that we typically do. I would not know what the differences or the issues would be with forms, unfortunately.
And Deb asked, have you come across a case where you might have fixed an issue for one screen reader, but the same disrupted, maybe change, disrupted, was disrupted for another screen reader's software. Wondering if there are any best practices to boost consistency.
Yeah, let me find one of my slides here. Oops. No, hold on. Let me do it a different way. So there are definitely great resources for best practices. There we go. First of all, I have not actually had that experience of having work for one but not for another. I wouldn't be surprised if that could happen. However, I have most all of the screen reading technology products that I've seen point to the WCAG guidelines. And so I think if you are consistently using these guidelines, then I think you'll be pretty safe with most screen reading. Now, this is the web, and someone could come out with something that is optimized to a specific area that maybe they deal with some of the standard guidelines, but not all of them. So it certainly can come up, but you're safe if you can follow these guidelines here.
Great. Other questions for Scott? Okay. Ninad writes, is it possible to make the grid question accessible without having to break them down into separate questions, perhaps by labeling the radio buttons using area attributes and reassigning the tab index order? Or is it recommended to always break them down in separate questions like you did?
Yeah. So yes, it is possible. I think it's difficult. It's something that, in our case, the final decision was made easy by the fact that the access, we had access to some of the areas that we needed to in the survey system to be able to do it really well. And so this was one thing that, if we were to switch survey systems, use another product, which, by the way, I'll just say right out, because this question might come up. I have yet to find a survey system that really does everything perfectly. I mean, that's just I think where we're at right now. But you can certainly do it, and I'd say if you were doing your own custom coding, that would be the best way to design a grid style question using tables and all of the appropriate attributes and everything set to have it fully accessible.
Well, we're at the top of the hour, so I just want to thank you so much, Scott, for this terrific and thought-provoking presentation. And I hope that kind of in the spirit of your topic, we can, the audience will join me in applauding you both auditorily and visually. So.
Thank you.
And lots of chat saying, thanking you for the advice and the wonderful talk, and thank you. So I want to echo that. The recording will be available and through the MPSDS website. So please visit it to review and I think Scott's slides are there as well. So again, thank you everyone for joining us today, and thank you again, Scott, for just a wonderful presentation.
You're welcome. Thank you.